All right, so welcome everyone to the third in this Alumni Speak series, which is a collaboration between the School of Social Work Student Organization and the Alumni Board. My name is Claire Bergman, and I am a board member of SWASO, and tonight we will be talking about the LDSS specialization. So to give us some perspective and advice, we have two alumni who will be sharing their experiences working in the macro field. Anleeb Jawade currently works as Associate Director of Corporate and Foundation Relations at Loyola University Chicago School of Law. She graduated from the School of Social Work in 2016 with an MSW and concentration in LDSS. Previously, Anleeb worked at City Year Chicago as a Senior Manager of Foundation and Development Communications. She also worked while in graduate school at a mental health nonprofit called Asian Human Services as a case manager slash counselor focused on immigrant and refugee clients. She received her undergraduate degree from Loyola as well, majoring in psychology and a minor in international studies. So welcome, Anleeb.
Thank you.
And we also have Claire Bowens, who has worked in the nonprofit sector for 9 years and served in a number of roles, including shelter worker, legal assistant, intake specialist, and caseworker. Claire currently serves as a senior manager of institutional advancement at After School Matters, an organization that provides paid out-of-school time programming to Chicago teens. Claire previously served as grants manager at Association House of Chicago, one of the city's original settlement houses. And Claire graduated from LUC in 2016 with an MSW and LDSS specialization. Claire has served on the associate board of Taller de Jose, her first LUC MSW placement site for the past 4 years. So welcome, Claire.
Awesome, and welcome everyone who's joining us tonight. Just wanted to first start off by letting you know that tonight is the last night, or tonight's the deadline for applying for the LSW. So make sure if you're planning on doing that, you fill out the, it was the LSW education form back to Doris. So Claire will drop that information in the chat for you. You should have received this email back on March 12th. So if that is something that you are interested in, make sure you turn that in as soon as you can. But also, who am I? So my name is Elizabeth, and I am a second year LDSS student with the School of Social Work. So, and I'm also a board member of SWASO, so I should say that. But yeah, tonight we have two alumni who are joining us, and I'm really excited. This is our third one, as Claire said. This is our third specialization that we've spotlit, but this is the one that I've been most anxious and excited about because I'm really interested in learning more about how does LDSS even work in the real world. So that's sort of what really inspired this series. For any of our audience, if you have any questions, please add them to the chat and we will add them to the conversation. I have some questions of my own, but this is really also just for all of you, really to learn what LDSS means and for anyone who needs to find a job. So yeah, but I will start with Anleeb. So how would you define LDSS and why did you choose this specialization?
So thank you for having this session, and hello everyone. So LDSS, obviously, it's what I always like to joke to people is that I literally am doing what I studied, which is leadership and development in social services. Like development is exactly what I've been doing since I graduated. But when I went into Loyola, so prior to that, I had done a lot of informational interviews with people because I wasn't sure if I wanted to do a degree in counseling, in public policy, an MBA, an MPH, a public health degree, or social work. So I was working at a mental health nonprofit at the time, and my director was an MSW. So that kind of gave me inspiration. And she was also one of the people that gave me advice. She's like, you could concentrate on whatever the equivalent of like administrative slash policy or whatever the equivalent of that is, because every school I think has a different designation for it. Because that just opens more doors for you. And because I was working as a case manager, I'd gotten that clinical experience. So I knew that I liked LDSS side more for that was kind of like how I went going in. Then I was like, like I've gotten the clinical experience. I've been there for 4 years. now like this is how I'm going to choose LDSS. So that's what it was. And development was a new field for me. Like that, I had kind of, you know, Loyola doesn't have a strong emphasis on policy, which I hope like they eventually change. But the development portion is pretty strong. And my internship, my second level internship was at Catholic Charities. So, you know, I was doing grant writing for them. So that was great. It was a great experience. Like it taught me everything about grant writing, fundraising. But I will say that once you graduate and you get more into the field, if you're interested in development, like there's so much more to it than grant writing. So I think that is also something to keep in mind, that you're not, even though I'm technically doing that right now, I'm a grant writer. Like that's like my glorified title is something else, but essentially that's what I'm doing. But there's so many other things that you can do. And another example is that I work for Loyola, and our advancement department is like 60 plus people, but the vice president of advancement, that's her title, is in charge of advancement, is also a social worker, like has an MSW. So, you know, it's like technically you can basically do anything, like oversees all fundraising. So that's what that would mean to me, I think. Short answer.
Yes, a very short answer, but yeah, I started with the informational interviews. I've been trying to do those as well, and that really opens your eyes to more out there, definitely. But I was also gonna ask Claire the same question, sort of, why did you choose the specialization? And adding to Anleeb's answer, like what other career opportunities are there?
Yeah. I think that, similarly, I had sort of worked for a while after graduating from college. I worked first as a legal assistant, thinking perhaps I want to be an immigration attorney. And while doing that work, I had some experience doing case management for people who were detained in an immigration detention center, and found that I actually really liked like navigating that system quite a bit, and helping people in that way, but also in addition to helping individuals, going above and beyond and sort of working for systems change. And so I think that that's where I really saw myself heading into an MSW program. I think similarly, I was a little disappointed at Loyola to see the, policy maybe not as strong. But some of the things, when I think of LDSS, I really feel like it's a specialization that's sort of training people for roles in nonprofit administration, and it's really training the future leaders of the sector. And that's not to say that people who clinicians who stick with nonprofit organizations, I think that they become some of the most vital leaders in the field. But I also think that there's a lot that goes into just like running an organization that, we can all develop expertise in. And I think that other careers within that realm of LDSS include people doing program evaluation. That was something that I had the experience to do a little bit of, both in my classes and then my second level internship, and also doing things like strategic partnerships and policy work. And so many organizations now have either a role or a department dedicated to like government relations, and I think essentially doing like lobbying. And so all of those are options for an LDSS grad.
Yeah, that's really nice to know. And I was gonna say, I think both of you talked about like needing an emphasis on policy, and maybe I know on leave is part of the alumni board. Maybe that's something that the alumni board can work on for future generations. um, but Claire, so sticking with you, I just wanted to say, so your current title is Senior Manager of Institutional Advancement. So can you tell us more about like what that means, and what does like a typical day look like?
Sure. Yeah, to borrow Anlieb's line, it's a my title is glorified grant writer. I am also in grant writing right now. And I think it's actually kind of a sweet spot in the organization for an LDSS person. My partner once told me that he thought that I was like the organization's oracle, that I would like read like the signs from the funding the funders of the world and then sort of like interpret what they were saying down to the organization and then like back up. But it's this really cool role in a nonprofit where you're working, with your programs colleagues, with the clientele that you're serving, with your colleagues in finance and your colleagues in research and eval, and you're sort of like gathering all this information and sort of like preparing and tweaking all of these pieces of a puzzle to make sure it fits just so to then kind of like sell your programming and your theory of change to a funder, and kind of showing how your work aligns with their interests to get financial resources for the organization. So, a typical day is actually quite varied, but it might look like me, speaking with programs staff about a new initiative that they want to run, but they need funding for it. So, we're going to use the data that we have about this new need for a program, and we're going to identify a funder who we can apply to, and we'll work with finance to create a budget that would include all of the costs of operating said program. And we'll work with research and evaluation to talk about how we're going to evaluate the program once we're implementing it, and sort of what are the deliverables that we're going to promise to the funder. If you give us $10,000, we're going to serve this many teens and achieve this impact. So it's kind of just like working on a giant jigsaw puzzle like every day.
If I can add into, from what I've learned of grant writing, a lot of it is taking those clinical aspects, taking those results, taking the stories and developing that into, this formula to continue either whatever funding source you're currently receiving or looking for that new funding source that could help grow your programs. And I think that's a really cool aspect of LDSS is you can look at the clinical aspects, but you get to be the one to like provide that funding to continue growing your programs and the organization as a whole.
Yeah, that's absolutely right on. And I think, I've had success. I've been pretty good at this job because of my MSW degree. I think that, I think I work well with programs colleagues. I think that I think I have a little bit of like credibility with them. They like trust their program in my hands. And I think at the same time, a lot of funders appreciate that I can speak to some of the intricacies of programming and things like that, that perhaps colleagues who don't necessarily have, the social work background, they may not have. And I'd be curious, Anli, if you've experienced that as well in your role.
Yeah, well, I was going to bring on Leave next to sort of talk about that as well. And I know you specifically work at Loyola. So is that different sort of from a nonprofit like After School Matters?
Mm-hmm. So yes, that is like 100%. I did start at Loyola in October of 2019. So I was probably in the office for about like 4 months, and then the pandemic hit. So since March of last year, it's been working from home. So, it's getting used to Loyola has obviously been like a very different experience. But prior to Loyola, I was at City or Chicago, which is kind of like a partner to After School Matters. Like it's a similar organization. They focus on like, it's an education-based nonprofit. But to answer that, like classic, like I call it like classic nonprofit fundraising is really different than a university. And that was my intention. I purposely picked a university. Like I had been at City or Chicago for 3 years. It was something that, a lot of what my job was very similar to what Claire described, that, like it's storytelling. You have to, and when you're in development, like you have to be kind of like careful with how you're telling these stories. You have to make sure that it's not taking like an exploitative like tone, like all of these things, like, and these nonprofits are mostly aware of it, but like I think we're being social workers, like we're always like kind of like it's in the back of our mind. But that's how it was, like, with grant writing, it's like looking at different organizations across the city of Chicago. And I think for both Claire and I, it's private fundraising, so we don't do government fundraising. Like that is a different Like there are different departments for that, like government relations and stuff kind of also falls into that at Loyola as well. So it was like similar, looking at whatever fits, like how to tell the story, what are the outcomes, what is the impact, where the donor's money is going, and like how close are they? Like some donors just write a check and that's it, and they don't. That's all. They just want nothing else. And then some are really like invested and just really want to know how, like at City or Chicago, like one of the focus neighborhoods was Englewood. So like we had a donor who gave $1 million because his focus was on Englewood and the schools in Englewood. So that kind of, is different. Then at Loyola, there is a lot more like university fundraising. I think there's a lot more red tape. It's hierarchical. So you have a lot, like I still have autonomy because I'm a grant writer. So we do kind of operate on our own schedule, but it's different. It's, you're working with faculty, you're working with professors, which is another way of like working. Like it's like seeing your professors as one thing when they're teaching a class, and then working with them is different because you see them in a different light. And so I'm working specifically for the law school, so I haven't had to like work with old professors and like have to change my opinion on them. And they're all great, but it is very like, like you kind of have to like still tiptoe around stuff. And it's like, okay, you can do everything else, but this is still how you do fundraising. Like you can't just go and like it's a lot of like management, project management, I think is like a big part of it. And I think another thing is that like when you're part of larger teams like this, like there's so much more that is in fundraising. Like it's like participating in like galas and dinners and like all of these things, which were not things that I thought of when I was in grad school. Like that's not what I thought fundraising would be, but all of it is like, all of it comes together to just raise money for this one big thing. And it's all really important. So I think it's just like, that's something to keep in mind, that this is part of the job, that, it's not just, you're not just in your role, that there are parts of fundraising that may or may not make you uncomfortable. And you just kind of have to see how you are with that. But right now, day to day is just like, the same, like research, find grants, for me, it's a little bit like try to track down people to find a project. Whereas at City or Chicago, it was more like I find an RFP, I apply for it, like cycle repeat. But here it's a little bit more finding projects that work. Do they align with the mission? Do we have people who can do the project? Like all of that. So yeah, a little bit more chasing people.
Yeah. And I guess sort of we didn't plan that both of you were going to be in fundraising. It just kind of worked out that way. But did you know that you wanted to go into fundraising when you finished the MSW program?
So yes, I think because I had already, like Catholic Charities was great, but Catholic Charities is huge. They have 150 programs. And so that just got overwhelming because there was nothing that I could focus my attention on. There was like, they have shelters, they have adult daycare, they have refugee services. So it was just like, I don't know. And you can't just be like, I'm going to be a grant writer for just this program. Like it's everything. So with that, I did start looking at fundraising jobs, and I was like, this is what I'm prepared for. I actually like this. And I feel like I am, in a way, I'm not directly seeing clients anymore, but I am advocating in a way for services. Like this is like for City or Chicago, like it was a lot of like something like that. Or at Loyola, like a current project that was funded was law students who are going to the border and are helping detained immigrants. And so, I mean, detained migrants are. And so that kind of like, raising money for that makes me feel like, okay, yeah, this is like, I feel like I'm in the right line. I do think about like if I had done policy or more program management or something like that, like I don't think personally I want to be an executive director for a nonprofit. I just don't, I don't want that responsibility, I think. And so I think in that way, yeah, like this is, it like was perfectly aligned.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like I picked this because I was like, oh, I want to do social justice. And so always kind of keeping that in mind that like you are at the macro level, but what you're doing is affecting the micro. But I wanted to ask Claire sort of a similar question. Like, did you want to go into fundraising when you started, and what was job searching like for you when you finished MSW program?
Yeah, I hope that this story will be like perhaps reassuring to soon to be grads. No is my answer. I I had one class, I think my second year of the program, that was program evaluation or it was program development. So we developed like this whole program, and one piece of it was like writing a grant. And I really loved like that whole project. And then I took a class that was about philanthropy as well. And it was very interesting. And the class ended and I felt like, ooh, this is still something that I like want to learn a lot about. So I felt very intrigued by the field, but I don't think I necessarily was thinking like, oh, I'm going to be a fundraiser after school. I did my second level placement in Mexico in Chiapas. And so I ended the program and was like traveling there for a while. And I, did not have health insurance and I had loans that were like starting to come out of like deferment after being a student. So I applied. I had a friend in that program with me who was actually like working full time during her MSW program. And she was just so great and really wanted me to like work at Association House where I ended up working. But the grant writer position, first of all, like that whole summer, all these clinical jobs were opening there. And she was asking me if I like wanted them. And I was like, no, like I'm trying to do LDSS, whatever that meant to me at the time. And then a grant writer job opened and I was like, well, I've written like one grant. I think I could do this. So I applied and she vouched for me. And I was offered that job and I just took it. I was like, yeah, I'll try this for a while. So I had very little like thought about going into fundraising and just a lot of thoughts about I needed money. So that's what I did. And I think that could be the reality of a lot of students coming out of this program. And I think it's okay to take a job right out of the program. There's a lot that you can learn and learn quickly. And, I think we saw a lot of people in our class like do a job for a year. And then there was this like big shakeup and everyone was doing something else like the year after. So I think I think sometimes it's okay to just like take a job after you graduate. And I think if you do that though, like if you can think about it as like a way to just sort of gain skills, I think that's a really great perspective to be like, I'm going to just do this for a while and gain some skills and, see where that leads me next. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I didn't do much of a job search. And, I think if you're able to take more time and do a more intentional job search, that's great. And I'd recommend that. And I recommend doing the informational interviews that Anbli was talking about. But I just didn't feel like I had that when I was graduating and kind of took the first job offer that I was given. And I didn't even negotiate my salary, which we can talk about later.
So I kind of have a follow-up question to that so you kind of jumped into that role. What did you do when you were at that organization to further your interest in LDSS outside of fundraising? Like, did you speak with other professionals there, or like what were the other things that you kind of did to explore more into that role?
Yeah, that's a great question. I thought that was a really awesome place to, have my first job. It was a smaller nonprofit that did quite a lot of programs. So I had a really generous colleague who was in our program evaluation department. And I worked with her really closely on, the programs each had a logic model and had like different outcomes that they were each trying to achieve. And she really like let me kind of get my hands in there working with program staff on ensuring that their logic models reflected sort of like what they were aiming to do through their programs and that their outcomes were achievable and that they were also fundable in terms of finding grant funding. And so that was a really cool experience to work so closely. And we had I also had a lot of access to our database. So I was able to kind of like learn how to do pivot tables and do a lot of like data manipulation. And that was cool as a grant writer too, because like I could find the precise data point that I really wanted to use to sort of like further the case for support for like a program. So that was awesome. And for a while, I was trying to find work in program evaluation because I just thought that that was, such an important piece of doing nonprofit work and ensuring that the services and programs that you're delivering are in fact high quality and are in fact, creating the change that you're saying that they're creating. So I still have a lot of passion for program evaluation, even at After School Matters. We have a whole research and evaluation department, and they're some of my best buds, and they know that I'm their biggest fan at the org. So I think that that's like a great place to kind of collaborate. If you go into grant writing, you'll find good collaborators there if your org has that department.
Mhm. Wow. Well, it's nice to know things haven't really changed. I think I've been trying to do the job searching, and clinical jobs are everywhere. It's a lot harder to find those LDSS jobs just because, like, I think like both of you do similar work, but you have very different titles. I think that's really difficult in the job search process, is like you have to dig a little bit harder because it's not just going to say therapist at the top or clinical. It's going to say something else that you have to interpret the meaning.
Yeah, I think you also might not see like the Masters of Social Work listed. It was one of the like higher level degrees. But like if you're reading the job description and you feel like you've gained those skills, or those are like knowledge areas or competencies that you have, like I think we need to advocate for the MSW in the field too. And that's something else that I feel pretty passionate about. Like I think that there's a lot that an MSW could do that like a policy person could do, or Andli, before you're mentioning a master's of public health, like I think there's overlap there. It might not be every job, but I think I would take like those degree suggestions as sort of like guidelines a little bit, as opposed to just sort of like being like, oh, well, I don't have that degree, so I'm out. Because um, I think social workers can do so much, and yeah, we just need to show we just need to show everybody that.
Yeah. So I was gonna say, like in your bio, it's part of that bio. It says that you're on the associate board for Taller de Jose.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that and like how you got started there, and like how has that helped your career trajectory?
Yeah, it's like one of my favorite things that I do outside of work. So yeah, my first social work internship was at Taller de Jose, and I was a compañera there. And it was just a great summer. I really enjoyed the staff. I really enjoyed the work. They have a pretty unique mission in Chicago. They don't necessarily offer any direct services. Their work is to accompany clients to the services that already exist throughout the city, but that perhaps don't feel so accessible. And they're often going with people. They actually physically go with clients on like public transit to different places around the city. They provide translation services on site. You'd be shocked at how many forms in Chicago are like not also in Spanish or like Mandarin or something. And so yeah, it was a really great organization, and I had kept up contact with the staff there. And then I think in 2017 they formed this associate board, and they reached out to former interns and asked if we would be interested in forming it. And that's been so cool because I've gained all this information about like board governance, like bylaws and service terms and things like that I don't necessarily get to do in my like day job. And yeah, it's just been really cool to sort of like do another level of nonprofit admin and oversight. And even just within fundraising too, like I don't do events as a grant writer. I don't do major gifts as a grant writer, but I've gotten to do a little bit of each of those things as a board member. And it's been cool to like put that on my resume in case I wanted to go into like a development director role or something. But also rule things out and be like, no, I don't like events. They stress me out. Like, I don't want to do that, And then also just gaining really different experiences. Like the organization really wanted to develop an advocacy policy. And they were like, well, how does that work with our 501c3? So myself and another board member, we worked together to create an advocacy policy for the organization, and they implemented it. And I was so pleased the other day. They responded really quickly to Adam Toledo's murder. And I was like, that was because we worked on that advocacy policy that they were able to do that, So I definitely think that working on a board has been a great experience. And I think, if you found yourself in an LDSS role that was like program eval, but you wanted to gain fundraising skills, like that would be another way that you could sort of leverage experience as an associate board member to kind of just gain other skills, test stuff out, like see if you like it, network with other young professionals. So yeah, it's been a great experience. And yeah, I feel like it's kind of just like also been that service aspect. Like I haven't always been able to take jobs at smaller organizations, but I think that that's like where my heart sort of is. And so it's allowed me to like work at a larger organization where I maybe don't have as much of a voice, but then like, serve this smaller org that like really needs me and really, wants me to be as involved as I want. So it's been a great experience.
Yeah, that's amazing. I actually know someone who their first level internship was at Taller de Jose. So
Awesome.
I'll have to tell him that he should check the associate board out.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're always recruiting.
Yeah, I think Claire put in the chat that there's always young professionals boards as well.
Yes.
So definitely something I've considered as well. But I wanted to switch to Anlieb. I just wanted to know sort of, like I was saying, like I think the clinical field is really hot right now. Or it's much more visible than I think the LDSS is much more invisible. You have to dig a little bit more. And I know you started off sort of in the clinical. So did you ever consider going clinical after the MSW program or yeah?
Yeah, so actually when Claire was speaking, that actually reminded me, and it's been a while since we graduated, so some of that stuff I'm like, wow, I don't remember some of it, which is, good and bad. I did look at clinical jobs too, because I think at my organization I had kind of hit the cap, and I was like, I'd been there 4 years, I was a little bit burnt out. Just, I was like, I want to go somewhere else. So I did look at, like, I was looking at hospital social work jobs. I was looking at basically everything under the sun that I was like, if I want to work at this, like I looked at Lurie's hospital because I was like, I would like to work there. So I was kind of more like, wherever I wanted to work, I was looking to see if there was any job that was applicable. Basically, that's kind of how I went about it. But it was sometimes now, like I don't have my LSW, which is something I would say that if anyone is interested in ever going back to clinical, try to get it right away. Don't wait. Because now I think every day, the further I get from it, like my goal was to get it within like a year of graduating. And now I'm just like, I don't need it. I really like, there's like no need for it whatsoever in the field that I'm in. But there are times I think, especially when like the pandemic hit and when everything else that's been happening, I kind of like had this desire to go back and like go do clinical work. Like I do miss working with clients and like the direct services, like that aspect of it. But I think it's always good to just keep your options open. And I think that's what's really good about the social work degree itself, that you can technically do anything. Like, I have seen people who work for foundations who are program officers who have an MSW. Like I mentioned, my old executive director had an MSW. My vice president of advancement has an MSW. There are like aldermen with MSWs. Like it's like like you can literally do any job really and just utilize your degree to the maximum. But I would say that for for LDSS jobs, I think one way to look at it is also the way I found jobs was looking at people's LinkedIn's and like picking up keywords and stuff. Like some of it was just as simple as that, or seeing people who had jobs I wanted and just seeing what they did, literally just a lot of like Google searching and just kind of looking up terms that way. So the way I found my Citier job was through Glassdoor, because I'd been looking for foundations and things like that. And then it just randomly popped up. So it's kind of like a lot of things like that. Like, you're not just confined to fundraising or grant writing. Like, there's so much more to it. I think that was one part of it. And now, like, I'm like, now knowing, being like 5 years out from grad school, it's almost going to be like 6 years soon. You also like don't stop yourself from applying for jobs, just kind of see how it goes. And again, like get your LSW, because I think that also helps with clinical jobs. If you ever want to do that, like that just kind of like, now I'm like, if I ever want to go back to clinical work, like I would have to get my LSW, because I'm so far removed now from like clinical work that like I need that experience to get me back in.
I think you came into my next question, which was about your license, like if you do have a license. But since you already said you don't have a license,
Mhm.
would it help you in the macro field to have an LSW, or is it? Because I feel like I've met people who only have their MSW,
Mhm.
and then I've met LCSWs who are in the macro field. So I'm
Mhm.
kind of wondering, like, what do you see?
So I would say for macro people, you have to get your LSW if you ever want to get your, like, you have to get that to get your LCSW. Like there's no way, like I am not seeing clients in any way, shape or form. Like if I get supervision now, I will have to pay for it. So that is something to like, that's like the harsh reality of it. In fundraising, honestly, no. I think my MSW as like a graduate degree is just like, they kind of like, some jobs do require a graduate degree, and that's kind of like, that's great. Like my team that I work on currently, 2 people have MBAs and I have an MSW. So it's like, like the team is all over the place. And then 2 other people went straight from undergrad to fundraising. So, and they're like doing events. So obviously that's different. But I think if I were to do anything else though, like I think if I were to go to advocacy, or if I wanted to like go work for the NASW or something like that, like I think, or go work in Springfield, like I feel like an LSW would definitely come in handy, just because you want to be more marketable and it gives you just like a little bit more like gravitas to your title. And then again, I think you need that because right now, if I get an LSW, that's the only way I can like moonlight as a part-time therapist and then get my hours. And then having your LCSW is obviously just like you've hit the cap. And I think that is also, I think that's probably more relevant than having a PhD in social work. Like obviously, like like I think a PhD in social work is great, but like in terms of that, like, it's like the ultimate. So yeah.
Lots to think about there. I feel like I go back and forth on the license all the time. But I was gonna ask Claire Bowens the same question. Just really like, do you have a license, and like what your thoughts are on getting the license, having the license in macro?
Yeah, I also do not have mine. I was supposed to take my test for the LSW last April, and shockingly, that didn't happen because the test center closed down. So I have to like study all over again. And it is harder, like the longer you're out of school. So I think it's worthwhile to just like get the LSW like pretty quickly out of grad school. I think that's worthwhile. Like Anlib said, if for nothing else, then like as another bargaining chip when you're negotiating your salary at a position, which I recommend doing always. But yeah, I think it's does that, and then as Anli mentioned, it does keep the door open so that if you did want to down the line pursue clinical work, like it's just already a little easier. Like you've already sort of like eliminated one barrier for yourself. I think if I could go back and do one thing differently, I would have like done that the year after I graduated. I would have made that a priority. I agree. I think during this time, like I've been thinking like, oh, there's so many like clinical jobs open. Like I would love to do like a part-time like therapy role or something. And again, it's just like harder. I will say that like I think there's a lot of ways you can do it. Like at one point I sort of like ran into this wall where I was like, I'm totally stuck. Like I've let too much time go by. I'm never going to be able to like get into the clinical field if I want to. I don't believe that's true anymore. I've found like a couple of different programs where you can actually, yeah, like either pay for supervision and do that, or you can actually like get paid to do that and like, charge on somebody else's license. The other thing too that I was once offered was like a marketing job at like a clinical nonprofit. It was like a combo like grant writing marketing job, and then they were like, and we'll give you like supervision so you can get your license. And they unfortunately like did away with that role again right before the pandemic. But I was like, oh, that would be perfect because like that could get me in the door. But I think that's like again a bargaining chip, and like the same thing. I think that if I'd stayed at Association House of Chicago, I think that I could have negotiated and said like, hey, I want to still grant write primarily, but like 10 hours a week or like 8 hours a week, I want to do clinical work and have the clinicians on staff like do my supervision. So I think you can get creative, but I think the bottom line is like just keep as many of your options open for yourself. I think one of the things that like I've just really been reflecting on is like careers are long. I'm going to be working for a really long time. And I just want to give myself the ability to like explore and do a lot of things and maybe like have kind of a hodgepodge career. And I feel like having the LSW would, just open more doors and potentially allow me to, negotiate for more money too. So I think there's no harm in getting it. And in terms of the clinical license on top of it, I don't know. I mean, I think that's really if you want to do clinical work. I don't think you need that in the macro field.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think I'd never heard of someone like bargaining a grant writing and adding supervision hours. That's a new one.
I'm telling you, like what you can negotiate so much. Like I don't like that needs to be another class of Loyola is like how to negotiate. It's something that I actually am like personally super passionate about. So if any of you are like getting close to getting a job offer or something and want someone to like talk you through like no BS, like get you that extra money, or if they really have no money, allegedly, like what PD are they paying for you? Like, are you getting more vacation time? Are you working in your clinical supervision? Like there's so much you can do. And especially when you have a few years and you've like shown that you're good, like, I can show like the kind of money I can bring in for an org. And so if I'm saying like, give me free supervision on top of it, like you'd be amazed like how people respond positively to that.
Interesting. We'll have to bring you back for like a negotiating workshop.
Oh my gosh, I would love that.
And then I was gonna say, I feel like I'm always sort of going back and forth with like smaller organizations versus larger organizations, like what you can do sort of laterally. So I'm wondering if that sort of bargaining is better in a smaller organization that's like you will do a little bit of everything versus like a larger organization that's like we hired you for this one thing right here.
Yeah, I think so. I think that you're on the right track with that. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but I agree. I think that like at smaller orgs, people are just used to like being a little more collaborative and everybody doing a little bit of other people's jobs. I think at big orgs, you do kind of run into like, well, that's so-and-so's job, So yeah, I think that is true.
Yeah. And so I was gonna sort of, you've already touched on like more needing negotiating skills from Loyola, but anything else sort of that the MSW program prepared you for in your career, and like what was that experience being an LDSS student?
Yeah, I feel like I gained so many tangible skills. Like like, yeah, like the program evaluation, like I feel like that was something that like I really felt like I had a really strong foundation in like logic models. And that's something that I still use. And it's like a framework that's just like really, really helpful, or like doing like a SWOT analysis, you know what I mean? I'm trying to think of some of the other ones. I like made a little list of skills that I felt like I um, gained. Like, oh yeah, like doing budgeting, like kind of like understanding like staff management. Obviously, grant writing was a very tangible skill that helped me get work. Um, and yeah, and I think in general, like, um, I don't know, I feel like the MSW more broadly helped me with, you know, being a better communicator, like just like understanding human behavior better, like being a better global citizen. So I think that the MSW has also like benefited my life personally as well as professionally. And yeah, I think I walked away with a lot of tangible skills from the LDSS specialization that it was a strong foundation that like made it much easier for me to just kind of like pick things up on the job once I started working.
Well, it's good to know. Uh, yeah, I think sometimes it feels like the macro is sort of added on to the on top of the MSW program. So, but I wanted to switch over to on leave, sort of going back to thinking about careers and skills. What's the rewarding part about your job? I know, I think we talked, it's a little bit harder. You're very removed from what's going on the ground, but how do you stay motivated and keep those rewards? And what are the challenges as well?
I think being in development in itself it is rewarding, again, because you are helping, like, at the basis of it, you're helping raise money for whatever program that it is. So like, again, at Loyola, there's several different programs, projects, professors are doing research, things like that. So all of that is like, it's like a constantly moving thing. There were times, I think, in the beginning, now I've gotten used to it. I think in the beginning, I would struggle a little bit more, where I felt like, oh, I'm not doing, and I think this is something that kind of comes with being an LDSS student, that you're not really in social work because you're not seeing clients, you're not working at a nonprofit, like in that way, like, so there is kind of like a little bit of a stigma attached to it. And I think it is what it is. Like, now I think I would continue with development. Like, I think I would probably continue with CFR, which is corporate and foundation relations, which is basically grant writing through foundations and everything. Like, I don't think other parts of development appeal to me. And I think another thing you have to be strategic about is where, if you were to say stick with fundraising, where you're working. Like, I wouldn't be, even though I love the Art Institute, I would not be able to fundraise for the Art Institute, because it's just not something that I think is really changing the lives versus changing the lives of students or changing the lives of like citizens. I would work for maybe a hospital, because like there's more, like there's like a direct contribution to like the good of humanity. I think that's really important. And like, one thing to also be aware of is a lot of organizations do tend to like latch onto buzzwords and stuff. So it's kind of like you have to be really like behind the mission and just know, and kind of take everything with a grain of salt, that leadership is never going to be perfect. Leadership will never always be authentic. Like, it's not, there's always going to be like, a lot of it ends up just being politics. So like, you kind of, then you're like, what did I get this degree for? But then it's just kind of like, this is how being here is maybe how I'm helping change this environment. So there is that. And then I think I don't, if I were to go back to clinical work, like, like, I feel like there are times when I think like maybe I'd rather be a consultant then for nonprofits, and like kind of advise them on how to run things and how to do, like, maybe not so much like program management and stuff like that, or like, how, like what Claire mentioned with like boards and stuff, like things like these are really essential things. Like, at my old nonprofit, I was like flabbergasted to learn they didn't have a logic model. Like, I was just like, oh my my God, like I'm a graduate student doing this. Like, what is going on? This organization is like 30 years old. What's happening? So I think kind of like being aware of these things, like it's like in that way you can contribute. But the difficult parts I think are just kind of like, there are times like I wouldn't, so with like development, there's like individual giving, which is like you work with rich individuals, like that's basically what it is. Then like people who are giving at the $1 million level and above, then who have buildings named after them, things like that. There's corporate sponsorships, which kind of go along the lines with like foundations, which is like different programs and stuff, and then annual giving, which is like, and then alumni relations, or some like at Loyola it's alumni relations, but at City or they also had like a similar thing where City or core members were able to give back like that, like it's like that same model. I wouldn't do individual giving because that just is it just feels transactional to me. So I think being a social work, like just being in social work and just seeing the gritty parts of it and everything, like it's like I don't feel like I'd be contributing anything, like it just feels slimy. So I think in that way, grant writing and fundraising through this vehicle is like perfect. And like kind of just going along with that.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the tough part of like the outward facing of of development is the like you're taking money from rich people and it's like however they decide on a whim. Um, it's kind of why I don't like foundation. I'm like, I don't think I could work for one. I'm like, whatever the rich family wants this year. Um, but wanted to ask you, I think you've sort of touched on this a little bit, but sort of where do you see yourself going from here? Like how do you keep growing? Do you want to just stay in this area? Do you want to keep growing as a grant writer? Become your boss? I'm sort of curious what sort of opportunities there are to keep growing.
So one of my friends, and I think it's a mutual friend, Claire, you know her as well, Jane, just opened up her own practice. So I think that's something that like way down the line, like if I ever get around to getting my LCSW, that is something I do consider because I think, like working at a community counseling mental health nonprofit, like you just see the in and outs and you see like the good, the bad, the ugly, and you see just how things are run. So kind of just that teaches you, like, I'm like, if I ever wanted to not open up a nonprofit, but my own practice or something, like what could I do? What serves me? What doesn't serve me? So that there is that. As far as I think fundraising, like I think maybe in like 5 years, I may eventually hit the highest I could possibly go. I don't know if I'd ever want to be a director of development. Like I would really have to love the organization I'm working for and like be committed to the mission because there's just so much more that goes into development that I don't know if I'd want to do that. And then there's possibly consulting, but then I also do think about CSR, which is corporate social responsibility, which is I think advising corporations and kind of like how the money goes into the communities. And I think being part of certain communities and working on the ground like kind of gives you more insight versus someone who just has an MBA and is working for like it's just kind of being that social worker gives you like you kind of understand how things are. So it's easy to just be like, why don't parents just send kids to better schools? But it's like, no, that's not how the framework of the city is. That's not how the city was ever created. That's not how it goes. So you can't just dump money into a school and think that's going to solve all the problems. So I think in that way, I'd maybe consider going towards that direction.
Well, that's really interesting. And I'm always really curious to see like where macro social workers sort of grow into. We're looking at you both for 5 years out. So hopefully some people on this call will invite them back 5 years from now. But I also wanted to ask Claire the same question, sort of where do you see yourself growing? Are you going to be staying in development? So
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that I would like to get my clinical license and do a little bit of that. Like, I think that was another part of why I got an MSW and maybe not a degree in policy. Like, I still think that I do have a lot of, people skills and things like that that I would like to incorporate into my career. I think, I don't want to only do grants, but it's something that I enjoy doing a lot. I think that I think I would love to see myself kind of create this like hodgepodge career where like I'm doing grant writing part-time for an org that I just like love so much that the words just like flow and the money flows and it's a beautiful thing. But then, you know, maybe I'm doing some clinical work on the side and, you know, like I'd even love to do like fundraising for a political candidate that I felt really passionately about or something. And so yeah, I mean, I feel really open. I feel like I probably won't stay in development for my whole career. I think it's been an excellent learning opportunity. I think, you know, down the line, if I ever became an ED at like a small nonprofit, like these skills would be just crucial, you know, the skills that I've gained in fundraising and grant writing. And so I'm really grateful to have learned them. I think that they're essential for so many nonprofits. So yeah, I don't know. I feel pretty open. I think, you know, I also only see myself really in grants. In development, like I think I would also struggle to just be a not just be, but like to be a development director and all that that encompasses. I think it's not for me. I think I like the fact that grants keeps me connected to the programs and the clients that orgs are serving. But yeah, I think I'd also like to do a little bit of clinical work too, and you know, also continue to get involved with policy in areas that I'm able to too. So, and I feel like, you know, I feel like those are all still possibilities for me 5 years out. So I hope that that's also encouraging to everybody on this call.
Yeah, well, as we're sort of wrapping up here, I'm going to ask both of you sort of the same question to sort of end, but just any sort of advice that you want to close us out with. If Claire, if you want to go, and then on leave, you can end us. Any advice that you would give to any LDSS students who are going to be graduating soon? Sort of what's out there. I know the big elephant in the room is COVID. You know, what's it like?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, working your network, like that was truly how I got my first job. And like, you know, utilize each other as well, especially when you're a couple years out. Like on leave and I connected and you referred me to that great program, the Development Leadership Consortium, which was so awesome. So, you know, work your network and like see your peers as part of that network too, like especially in LDSS because it's small. You're few, but you're mighty. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Mm-hmm. I would say that too. Yeah, definitely utilize your networks. Another thing I was going to say, and we kind of talked about it with the negotiation thing, was just ask for whatever salary you want. Ask for like 10 to 15,000 above that. Like that's the best way. That way, even if don't like ask for 100,000 just because that's, you know, kind of impossible right away. But just kind of keep that in mind. Like I think that's something that they don't teach us at all. And I think unfortunately, being with LDSS students, we kind of have you have that advantage that jobs are higher paying. So there's that. But I think, yeah, use your networks, use your professors, like hone in on those connections so you always have a letter of reference, and keep in touch with everyone. Like, you know, just like again, like Claire and I have like connected. Like I'm on the alumni board. Like it's just like you're still friends with people in grad school. Like there's a Facebook group that like posts jobs every now and then. So it's just like just use everything to your full advantage. Like especially as a student right now, and apply for basically every job, even if you think you're not qualified for it, because you never know. But that's the truth of it.
Yeah, that's a great way to end because I always need to be reminded to stop looking at just the requirements. So, but thank you, everyone. Claire, did you want to take this one?
Yes. So just last thing here. So we do have our social media that is up on the screen. We post lots of different things, upcoming events. We do have Facebook groups as well as that and Lee mentioned of our own students, and we've been getting a lot of job opportunities that we've been posting. So if you're interested in those, feel free to reach out to Elizabeth or myself and we can connect you with the link to that. And then we do post our recordings onto our YouTube page so you can see these later. We also have our health specialization and our schools if you're still deciding what you want to do. But thank you again to everyone for being here. Thank you to our 2 alumni for joining us. And good luck, everybody, in your final few weeks here of the semester. We're in the home stretch.
And just so everyone knows, we will be emailing everyone some resources and how to get in contact with our alumni. So there will be an email to come. So thank you so much, Anleve and Claire.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out, everyone, on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to chat more with any of you.
Any questions, anything, just reach out.